My conversation today is with Stephen Allday, a well-known and very experienced railway consultant from Sydney in Australia. Just as I do, Stephen likes to think a lot about the past and also the future of railways. And today we're talking about three topics that are very relevant for the future of railways, definitely in Australia, but probably in other parts of the world as well. We're talking high-speed rail, of course, in Australia. That's the probably number one most popular topic at the moment. But we also talk about the intended rollout of ETCS, the European Train Control System, and interoperability. And we talk lastly about the resource shortage in the railway industry, specifically the railway signaling industry in Australia, which I'm pretty sure has a similar touch to it than in many other countries. If you like the way that Steve and I are talking, then you may also be interested in his previous appearances on this podcast. So I put all of them together in a playlist, which I link to this episode at the very end. And you can do me a great favor by subscribing to the channel, by sharing this video with other friends and colleagues, and of course by liking it, because then more people get to see it, which can only be good for the railway industry. But now, please enjoy my conversation with the one and only Steve Allday. Steve, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks for the invite. Always enjoy these.
I was also looking forward to it. You've been on the show a few times. How would you introduce yourself these days? So, what are you doing? How do you see yourself?
That's a good, interesting question, Frank. I guess I've been around the block a little bit, and the way I try and describe myself at this moment in time is from a career perspective. I'm probably sort of certainly over the halfway line. Let's put it that way. But how would I describe myself? I just think I'm just somebody who loves railways and loves being involved in railways. I've done many different things, as you know, and our paths have crossed a few times. And I always just find this is a very interesting industry, and it's one that I've had a lifetime of fun out of, and therefore I see my role to try and help others where I can, and at the same time I love to get involved in anything new that's going on and making sure that I can see that the next generation of railway people are there.
So you sound like a consultant, but not the typical consultant in the
Yeah.
negative way that people see it sometimes.
Yes, I would get so. I avoid the term consultant, but I guess I am these days, Frank.
Yeah. So if you want to avoid the term consultant, what else would you say?
Um, Professional railwayman, I think, is what I would call myself.
Okay.
I think, if you look at some of the things that I've done in terms of the institutions that I've joined, as an example, I've tried to broaden that so that I'm not just seen as an IRSC person, but I also joined the PWI or Rail AI, AI or IA as they are now, or EI, sorry, Rail Engineering Institute, and Chiro as well. So I like to think I'm become a very rounded railwayman.
Yeah. I think we talked about your collection of memberships in the previous episode, so I don't want to go there again. What I will
Yeah.
probably do is put together a playlist of all of your previous podcast episodes and put it at the end of this episode here. So anybody wanting to dive deeper into the world of Steve Allday, they can do it after watching this one. Um, when we're not talking, I tend to follow your posts on LinkedIn. You seem to have a certain rhythm of about one post a week, sometimes a bit more than that, but one per week seems to be an average. And all your posts seem to be quite well thought through, to say the least. I don't know how long it takes you to put together one of your posts, Um, but they definitely all talk about, or they show your love for the industry that you already mentioned. They are always on the optimistic side, like glass half full rather than glass half empty. And if I wanted to put them into categories, there is one aspect of reminiscence of the history of rail. So you were writing a bit about the 200th anniversary of railway as a technology or as a transport mode. And the other thing is like looking forward. What are the challenges for the industry for the future? And for obvious reasons, I want to focus more on the future today. And one of the certainly hot topics in Australia at the moment and also in other countries is high speed rail. Just for people to not switch off because they said, I don't want to hear about high speed rail. We are also talking about other things during our discussion today. I want to talk about ETCS and interoperability for Australia. And I also want to talk about the industry as such and resource issues that we may have in the industry. So anybody interested in those things, just stay with us while we're starting off with high speed rail. Um, Maybe a good start is if you can just talk a little bit about your your recent involvement in high speed rail, both here in Australia and also overseas.
Yep. Yeah, happy to do so, Frank. So, my involvement here in Australia, I was fortunate to be involved in the early development of what was the business case. And personally, I can see, and recognise the effort that went into that. Quite often, if you're sitting on the outside looking in, there's not clear visibility of the work and effort that went into it. But I could certainly say for this time round here in Australia with the proposed Newcastle to Sydney link, which is the first leg of what is intended to be a national East Coast leg all the way along from Brisbane through to Melbourne. There is there's a considerable amount of effort that got into this, and quite often I'm asked by people going, well, can we afford it and things like that. My answer to that, Frank, is in all honesty, I think we're getting to the point now where can we afford not to do it? And what I mean by that is, um, uh, things have changed. I know we've been talking about it for well longer than even I've been in Australia, but things have changed. Um, for instance, I know I've watched and I've been involved to a certain degree with some of the hard yards that's gone on, for instance, on City Trains network at this moment in time, and you will be aware that they're currently rolling out European train control there. Um, but in reality, that network, if you look at it, when it was built and went all the way to Newcastle, it was a different railway. It was a different era. There was different population involved. And I know there's often jokes, but it's true. You could go on a steam train between Newcastle and Sydney quicker than you can do today. And it's got nothing to do with the performance of city trains at all. It's that network is at capacity, particularly the closer you get to Sydney. I travel from the Central Coast, and so I was going to say suffer. I don't mean suffer, but I witness it, every time. And will European train control do something? Yes. Will it do enough? No, it just won't. And it's not just about moving people. It's about growth. It's about economic growth. And I'm sure in previous podcasts that you've had with a certain gentleman who is part of the High Speed Rail Authority, he brought that out as well. It's this is about the growth for the economic growth for Australia. It's more than just moving people. It's not about competing with airlines and things like that. It's completely different. It's all about providing an integrated rail network that services both local regional, and ultimately national needs. As I say, I've got to the point where, and clearly I'm an enthusiast of it, but I think it's for sound reasons, Frank, because they clearly, if we don't do it, um, what's the alternative? We can't continue to keep, traveling on airlines all the while, and it's just, and it will stagnate the growth that's clearly there in the regions. So that's why I see it's important. And equally, I think it's important for each of the regions themselves. So New South Wales for this one, same in Melbourne for a regional growth there, and likewise, up in Queensland as well. And then eventually they'll join. So yeah, I am an enthusiast, and I do believe in it, and I believe in it for the right reasons.
What do you think is the biggest difference that makes it more likely now that it will be built, it will go ahead compared to previous attempts? I mean, as you said already, this is not the first attempt of venturing into the high-speed rail space here in Australia. It's almost like a running gag that the government starts some initiatives, gets almost to the starting line, and then they drop the ball again. Or I should say more respectfully, they decide for good reasons to not do it, but defer it or kick the can down the road. What's different this time, and why are you more optimistic this time that it goes up? You were probably optimistic before, but what makes you more optimistic this time?
Okay. I think what makes me more optimistic is the approach that's been taken this time. It is a different approach to that which has been taken before. So we've got the business case, or the initial business case, which has got signed off to go to the next phase. And it's how we're approaching that this time round that, for me, is going to make a huge difference. Where we talked about consultants, and am I a consultant or am I not? Put that to one side. I think if you look at the approach this time round, yes, you do need advisors within the client side, which is, those packages of work that's currently out now. But the big difference I think this time is they're going to spend a lot of time, and they already have, but they're going to spend a lot more time managing and defining quite clearly the what, as I like to say. Now, how do they want this railway to work? How do they want it to operate? I've got a great saying that I always say: everybody can talk about how a railway operates in a normal mode, and we always know that railways go from normal mode into degraded modes. But more importantly, these days we have the capability and competence to be able to manage how we go from a normal mode of operation to a degraded mode of operation gracefully, as I call it. And so, all of those things, and defining how you want that railway to work, then go to industry and let industry tell you the how. um, and that to me is a big step change. And I think the way that they've constructed the approach to market. So as I said, you've got the consultants on the client side. You've then got the supply chain, and you've got the systems. I think most people know what the packages are, but you've got effectively a systems type package. Then you've got the area civil packages, and getting that initial expressions of interest, and then picking two or stroke three suppliers to go into that early contractor involvement, generating that design to quite a significant level, whereby not only are they doing that design, and it's integrated because there's sharing of data constantly between both the civil types and the civil type packages. Defining what the interfaces will be, capturing those, and making sure they're quite clearly defined in what I call interface requirement specifications, getting all of the parties to sign off on those so everybody's on the same page, ensuring that the requirements are clearly defined and captured and are traced through at that design level and at that interface level, such that what we get back from the market is much, much more solid in terms of what we, in terms of what they're pricing, because it's their design, it's the interfaces that they've agreed between themselves. Um, and I think that's quite important. And I think the other thing that's quite important is this approach will bring about the innovation that exists in our railways and in our suppliers that we never ever bring out normally. I often have conversations with suppliers and go, well, your systems are quite capable of doing quite a bit more in terms of collecting data, looking at it through. I'll avoid AI, but we'll call it machine learning. But capturing all of that data and using that, but you never bring it to the table. And the answer is always, well, you never ask. And the reason why we client side never ask is because they tend to think it pushes up the price. And the competitors, the suppliers are in a competitive market and they want to make sure that they win the job. I think the approach this time is with also having the obligation and downstream obligation of whatever they present, they've got to ensure that it performs because they'll be held to account on the performance of the railway. They will bring naturally that innovation to the table. That's why I think it's completely different this time frame.
I think there's also one other factor, and that's a hypothesis on mine, and maybe you, since you worked on the business case, I consider you more of an insider certainly than I am, and maybe you can confirm or otherwise. I think a big difference this time is really the High Speed Rail Authority. We did have government entities before, for example, the National Faster Rail Authority. Some people may have already forgotten that this thing ever existed. But National Faster Rail was a bit like, okay, well, that's Sydney to Newcastle, but also Sydney to Parkes and Sydney to Wollongong and Perth to Bunbury and Melbourne to Geelong and all these kinds of what I would call regional fast rail. And now I think it's really the first time that the government has said, well, wait a minute, we have a vision here to have high-speed rail from Melbourne via Sydney to Brisbane. And we are creating a authority that's explicitly, even in its name, responsible for that. And also, I think another difference is that this time this authority is much more delivery oriented. And I think that comes very much down to the appointment of Tim Parker, because Tim is a delivery guy. He was, I would almost say, Mr. Delivery in Sydney Metro in the early years. And I think the way that Tim clicks, so at least that's my reading of him, is that whatever he's doing with the business case and now the development phase, he does it in a way that he says, okay, well, if in 2 years government comes back to me and said, Tim, you will be responsible for delivering that thing, he will be able to, because all the planning is oriented towards deliverability. I personally think that's something that we didn't have before, at least not in that clarity and consequence. So what about your views on that? Would you concur with that, or have I am I down the wrong path?
No, you're not down the wrong path at all. I absolutely concur with that. I think I have the greatest respect for Tim Parker and what he's achieved previous to, and you're absolutely right. Tim very much is a delivery focused person, but that doesn't mean to say that that's a bad thing at all. It's a good thing because we have
Mm.
lacked that in the past. So this time around, as we're developing it with delivery in mind, with what the end game is all about and how we achieve it, and make sure that he's thought about the program, how it might be put together. There's an awful lot of work been done in terms of the alignment and looking at what that alignment might look like. The very process that I talked about earlier on in terms of how they're packaging this and how they're utilizing the skill sets of the market. That's the thoughts of somebody who delivers things and understands, where you can get the best out of market and achieve more certainty in outcome. So absolutely, that the Hezra and the building of Hezra is a major step forward and a difference from previous two. And then the people that they've got within it, and certainly spearheaded and led by Tim. You know, I think that's been a tremendous step forward, and I've got, that's why I've got every faith this will work, because there's a lot of thought gone into, as I said to you, even in the business case, all of that thinking about how it will be delivered, what's the long-term objectives of all of this has gone into that. So it's not just a matter of, oh, we'll look at Newcastle to Sydney and that's it. It's gone way beyond that. There's a lot of effort that's gone into that, and in some respects, I mean, you talk to me about other things. So I am at this moment in time doing some advisory work for the US High Speed Rail Authority, and you can see a lot of synergies between the two. But if I may say, and this is not saying anything disrespectful at all to the people that I've come to love and enjoy and work with in the US High Speed Rail Authority. Australia, in this very short period of 12 to 18 months that we've this time round, have moved forward significantly. They understand what the challenges are. US are beginning to understand them, but they're not as advanced in some respects to where we are in Australia. So things like understanding the criticality of how you build these networks up, and you don't build them up and then just they grow, laterally, if you like. They grow in segments. So there's one railway over here, there's another railway over there. The important thing is that you understand that at some point downstream, they've all got to join. And more importantly, not just join, and it isn't just joining in the track, they've got to be able to be wholly interoperable, so that no matter what you do individually on each of those networks as they grow, they can organically knit together and work.
That's a very important point, and I would have thought from a distance that I would have seen that also as one of the big differences, that the US is probably a bit more fragmented. They build a bit of high speed in California, at least they want to. They also build a bit of high speed, or they plan to, between, say, New York City and Washington, D.C. If you look how far these two are apart, they will probably never come together, or maybe not in the next 50 years or something like that. So what's happening in Australia is that they have a vision for the entire network. And you may say, okay, well, it's closer together and much smaller and so on. But anyway, the important thing is there is a vision for the end state of the entire network. So all the way from Melbourne to Brisbane via Sydney. And in a similar way that Sydney Metro has done it, that they thought from the beginning, not just we're building one metro line from Tallawong to Chatswood, they were thinking right from the start, okay, how does it look like when we build the second line, when we build the third line, when we extend the first line? So there was a network strategy that made everything work as it went along. And the same thing seems to happen for high-speed rail. But at the same time, that's actually a question I wanted to ask. The long-term idea, going beyond Sydney to Newcastle, which is the first stage, the long-term plan seems to be that different states start with little snippets of high-speed rail. So in Queensland, for example, the natural candidate would be from Brisbane to the Gold Coast, and then maybe across the border to New South Wales into places like Ballina or something like that. In Melbourne, it would be up to Shepparton, for example, or maybe all the way up to Wodonga, Albury. And in Sydney, you could easily see how it continues from Sydney down to Canberra. So if you think about three different bits of high-speed railway in three different states, firstly, you need to triple certain infrastructure. So you can't rely on a train depot sitting in near Lake Macquarie for operations between Melbourne and Shepparton. So you would basically have to have your own train fleet for this Melbourne operation and your own train fleet for the Queensland operation. until they come together at some point in time, which may be, I don't know, 20, 30 years down the road. But then everything has to fit together. So, so, uh,
Absolutely.
so regardless of all the different activities that you may want to start in the different states to keep them motivated, and because it makes sense to start off with some regional fast rail, basically the Sydney Newcastle version of Victoria and of Queensland, but making sure everything fits together over a long period of time where projects will be built at different points in time and so on. I could imagine that's quite a huge coordination effort, isn't it?
It absolutely is, which is why, and I think you've hit a very good point in raising that. That's what makes the Newcastle to Sydney element so important and so critical in terms of how it's developed, because a lot of what's being developed there is setting the scene and the standards for what's going to happen elsewhere. So you're not going to have to reinvent the wheel with Queensland high speed rail or with the Victoria high speed rail. A lot of these should be transferable, but in doing that, there's a real amount of effort in terms of what Again, we talked about it before about interoperability. All too often, when engineers talk about interoperability, and particularly you and I, we go straight into ETCS and signaling and but it's way beyond that, if you know what I mean. It's the civils, it's the rolling stock, as well as the systems to ensure that we put in place the ability to have a competitive market for which we've clearly got for Newcastle to Sydney, but ensure that you have that same competitive market for Queensland and for Victoria, because that is key. And so it does mean you could well have different rolling stock. You could. But the important thing is it won't matter because you've set the standards and you've nailed down interoperability challenge that is required, such that and I suspect, Frank, you're right. I suspect I won't be around when they join the dots, but you know that it will work.
Well, yeah, the question is, do you? I mean, one of the things that I think is absolutely critical for this whole thing, that you keep the High Speed Rail Authority as an informed client for all these projects in the different states. What you absolutely cannot
Yep.
do is handball those things over to the states. And you say, well, you guys in Melbourne, you build your own little piece of high speed rail. And then, well, we talk a few times per week and then we make sure that it will align. I don't think that's going to work.
No.
So you need to make sure that the High Speed Rail Authority remains the system authority from a technical viewpoint for high speed rail in all those different projects. But then often the proof for interoperability is in the pudding, as they say in the UK. So then the question becomes, okay, if the Victorian start of high speed rail picks a different rolling stock supplier, and you say, well, that's absolutely okay as long as they comply with the same standards. Yeah, but how do you test that? Are you going to fly one of the Victorian high speed trains to New South Wales to have them running on Sydney Newcastle for testing purposes, and then you put them back on a truck and carry them back down to Victoria? I
No.
there are still a few potential potholes in that road to a real interoperable outcome, I would think.
You're absolutely right. Is it a challenge? Yes, it is a challenge. But I mean, you look at Europe; they manage that, and they have over years, and it's taken time. But you have those, STIs, for standards for interoperability, and they exist. And I think it's important that we at least establish something like that, that we can then. It's a measure that you're working against, and all of the suppliers understand this, whether they're rolling stock suppliers, whether they're civil engineers and infrastructure designers and builders. They understand that concept, and I think that's why. And again, you said it's going to be a challenge. This first section is a real how do I put it? Good engineering challenge, because that's why on the on the on the client side and the consultants that ultimately advise them, their role is critical in ensuring that during that ECI phase, we do develop those things and that they're fully understood by all the participating parties. And they're testing it to make sure that when it's done applied elsewhere, it holds water. Yeah, that's the real challenge, but it's an exciting challenge, and it's one. One of the nice things is we actually recognize it, if you know what I mean. Now, that in itself, looking back to what we said before, the past and today, we understand what those challenges are this time, and we're facing them head on, as opposed to no, we're just looking to try and build a railway, and that's it. There is some real hard, solid thought that's gone into this. And by the way, going back to the American bit, they actually do have a network themselves of the ultimate high speed rail, and that was one of the conversations that I had. I said, and around with them is, how are you going to ensure that they will all eventually move rolling stock from one end to another without any issues in terms of special conditions of operations, or et cetera, et cetera. So they're starting to recognize it. Have they nailed it? No. I think we've gone one stage further. Not only do we recognize it, we're beginning to try and tackle it.
Yes, yes. I was gonna ask what the response in America was, and when you said they start recognizing it, I thought, okay, well, that's what I thought. Yeah, that there is definitely no solution today. I would be very surprised if there was one, but I mean, starting to see there is a challenge that needs to be addressed early is certainly a first step towards resolving it. When it comes to your training on advanced signaling and train control, nothing beats a good quality. That's why I partnered with the Informa Connect Academy to create 7 fantastic online trainings that I believe are the best and most comprehensive portfolio of online trainings in this space in the entire world. You see the 7 trainings that I'm offering through Informa in the boxes here. And you also see at the very top a web link where you can find information on all of these training courses. If the education and your personal development in the field of advanced train control is of any importance to you, I recommend highly that you check it out. And I would look forward very much to welcome you in one of these training courses. All of them have interactive elements, so we can actually meet face to face in those trainings, even though they are online courses. It needs to be seen to be believed. And now back to the conversation. Talking about interoperability, I want to use this as a segue to go into our second topic for today, which is that whole thing currently happening with interoperability of the existing rail network. So going away from high-speed rail, looking at existing networks, and talking about ETCS, the European Train Control System, as the earmarked technology for the National Network for Interoperability in Australia. And the more I think about it, the more I can see some parallels with the planning for high-speed rail. So you have a little bit of ETCS going on in Sydney. You have a little bit of ETCS going on in Brisbane. You have some plans for ETCS in other places, like Melbourne now wants to adopt ETCS, and ARTC is thinking about ETCS for the interstate network. So we are building, similar to the high-speed rail concept, we're building or starting to build ETCS islands in different places. And then we say, well, now we want to make it interoperable. And it should be interoperable because it's ETCS. And everybody thinks, well, ETCS by nature is interoperable. And one of the key things that I'm doing, for example, in my ETCS training courses, is to warn people and say it's not quite that simple. And the experience from Europe shows that interoperability definitely doesn't fall off a tree, especially with
No.
ETCS, or well, including with ETCS. So it's not a silver bullet because it depends very much on the application of ETCS. And if you apply it in too much of a divergent manner in different parts of the railway network, you may end up with similar interoperability problems that you had before, possibly with legacy systems. So what's your
Yeah.
view on that? I
Yeah.
mean, you are a signaling person as well as much as I am, so I'm really looking forward to that discussion.
Yeah. Thank you for calling me ceiling engineer, by the way, because you know my background is comms, but I have done S&T, so thank you for that. You're absolutely right. ETCS is a good platform for achieving interoperability, but that in itself will not guarantee you it. It's absolutely right. You've got to work. You've got to be very careful how you apply it, and now I think the important thing is not to build in bespoke solutions, because that is the worst thing you can do. You can always apply certain operational requirements, but stay within the realms of, don't make it bespoke. Um, and I think quite often people forget that, and as a result, they walk down that very, very slippery slope of moving away from actual interoperability downstream, because they tend to think very focused about their railway, and I'm trying to think of the word that I've heard many times before, but you can certainly adapt it, but don't change it. Stay away from making bespoke solutions, because that will kill you. Um, and that comes back to, if you look like on the high speed rail as an example, making sure that they've got a vision for how that network works end to end, so that whatever they do, again, coming back to the first part, you always have that end game in place, so that you have that ability to roll out a standard platform that you're dealing with localized, addressing localized issues, but staying within the realms of interoperability as opposed to becoming bespoke.
I mean,
And it's
avoiding,
it's a challenge, right?
yes. I mean, avoiding anything bespoke is certainly a very, very important point. However, is this really what happens or not? And I'm trying to be not to be pessimistic here, but at the moment, if I look at what's happening in Australia, there are some reasons for concern as far as I can see. So, for example, when I talk to people and I say, well, do you think your ETCS application is standard conform? And then I get an answer, oh yeah, it's 100% conform with European standards. Well, what makes you so certain? That's what the supplier told us. Right. Uh,
Yes.
and then the next time you talk to them, like 6-12 months later, where they already went a bit up on the learning curve, and you say, well, what about your standard conformity? And then the answer is, well, we are mostly standard conform. What exactly do you mean by mostly? Well, there are a few specialties in our railway, but only very few. Okay, so this is already the start, or the indication of the start towards some degree of bespokeness, right? Of customization. And you see, well, okay, but the specialties that you do on your network are probably not the same specialties that they're doing on the network over there. How do you make sure that future interoperability will be achieved or will be maintained. Oh, well, yeah, we're having regular meetings with the other guys over there. So the more I hear this, the more I'm getting nervous, because even though I'm hearing all the right sound bites, the substance behind that seems to be
Yeah,
missing more often than not. And that basically brings me back to that concept of a system authority. So in Europe we have the ERA, the European Union Agency of Railways,
yep,
who is the official system authority for ETCS, and they have all this political leverage that they can really do something, they can do their job, and they can say something if something's not right. We need something like this for Australia, I think.
ab-
And
absolutely fine.
we haven't got it. Today we haven't got it.
Yeah.
And I
So,
think,
so
yes, okay, well,
yeah.
I let you
Sorry,
talk
sorry.
to that.
I was
Yeah.
going to exactly that. So, I mean, yeah, and what we're talking about is configure, don't customize. Yeah. So,
Yes.
so you mustn't customize. Now, I did get involved in again the work that was done for the NTC in respect to how we got to that decision to go towards ETCS and move away from, at that time, as you know, we had ATMS still being rolled out on ARTC. And so there was a lot of debates around that involving both the RIMs as well as the RSOs and as well as the suppliers themselves. And I was again very fortunate to be involved in that. Um, and one of the things that we brought out, because there was a number of recommendations that were put to the NTC, was the establishment of a proper authority that sits over it all, to ensure that the states will be a member of that body, if you like, but there's an overarching body that is providing that governance that is required to ensure that the controls are at least established and in place, such that when the states are doing the various things that they want to do, there's a body there that can talk about it, and to ensure that we don't go down that path of customization and stick to it being a configuration issue. The other thing that we raised, Frank, which was very, very interesting, was and I actually gave a presentation to the IRC about this time last year, a little bit before, um, around what we did here in Australia in arriving at that ETCS decision, and how we move forward with the NTC. And one of the other things that we actually said was we also believe that body, that representative, should also be a member of ULINK, so that we're actually part of that body, and that's not foreign, Frank. In many respects, Saudi Arabia SAR is already a member. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be, because that will then get the more, the even more solid ties around making sure that what's done from an industry perspective and the suppliers who have to work to that, we've got a voice there as well. So if there's certain things we want bringing out, we can do so as a member of that international body, if you like. So it's definitely being talked about, Frank. I know NTC want that, and that there is a drive towards establishing that body. Um, I certainly believe that the states, New South Wales, definitely, Victoria, definitely, and I believe Queensland as well as the other ones, will come to the table on that and would support that. But we do need it, Frank. You're absolutely right, because we can't leaving the states to themselves and saying it's ETCS and don't worry, we trust you, you know what you're doing. That won't work.
Yeah. Yeah, correct. I see the same thing. I am I'm not fully on board with merging the ETCS interoperability activities with ULinks. I see ULinks as an initiative to standardize interlockings, specifically interlocking interfaces to field signaling equipment. So that's at least how they
Yeah,
started. Maybe they blow this up in the future and expand it. I don't know. Um, I still have to read some of the material for ULinks. I got gladly, I was recently provided with some information there from an insider in Europe, but I must shamefully admit I haven't read it yet. So, but I need to. But I already heard things on LinkedIn. Well, if we want to be interoperable in Australia, we have to adopt ULinks. And I said, well, not so fast. That's not necessarily the case. You can absolutely have interoperability without ULinks. And you can do
Yep.
this with conventional interlockings and with ETCS on top of it, and that it will all work. Yeah, because ULinks creates coherent interfaces on a different level, but not necessarily the
Yep.
level that you need for operating trains in an interoperable fashion. So that's number one. And if I see a struggle to establish an ETCS system authority for Australia in the first place, and within 2 seconds I give them the additional task of getting involved in ULinks, I would see a risk that I'm spreading them too thin and I'm distracting them with those ULinks activities from the actual main game, which is making sure that the ETCS applications are interoperable.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't argue with you, Frank. I mean, it is a bold step that I was proposing to go straight from one to the other. We do need to establish our own first, and that very much is understood. Certainly, in the work that I got involved with, it was a recommendation put forward, and I believe that's a recommendation that is being taken forward as well. So to ensure that, from as a country, we have got those checks and balances in place and a governance established that ensures that as we move forward, if there are certain elements that are specific to how a certain operator wants to run that railway, we ensure that we don't step against and make and enable them to do something bespoke. So I think that is the first one. I would always argue that I think ultimately we need to be part of those more international bodies because I think it's important, such that we have a say in it, and we can also understand what's going on because it is quite it is, if you stay a little bit isolated, you can move away. So I think the level of involvement, I think, is something to be debated about. But I think there's some downstream, there's some good value. And as I said in my presentation that I gave last year, I mean, it can't be beyond the will of man. I mean, Australia is now a member of the Eurovision Song Contest, so surely we could be a member of something else as well.
Yeah, well, yes, a member, yes. It's really a question of focus. So and
Yes.
you probably know that when you do any job in any organization, there are a number of activities that you are expected to be involved in, and
Yep.
you tend to get sucked into certain activities simply because they seem easier than some other activities, even though the more difficult activities may be the more important ones as well. So so
Yep.
when I basically see both things, ULinks on the one hand and ETCS interoperability on the other thing, and the ULinks is um, very embracing. They
Yep.
do a lot of stuff. There are regular progress meetings. Any new members will probably be embraced with open arms and getting involved and so on. And there are regular meetings. So it's very, very easy to get sucked into this activity with the risk of a certain negligence of the actual main task, which is ensuring ETCS interoperability. And there's another aspect here which I really think is the crunch point for ETCS interoperability this time. And this is the ability to stand up to a railway and to say, you have gone down a bespoke path in the past. We need you to come back. So we need you to
Yep.
remove those bespoke aspects of your existing ETCS application, for the sake of interoperability. Who is going to do that? Who is going to stand up to a Sydney Trains or Transport for New South Wales or Queensland Rail or whoever the authority is in Victoria and say, you've got an existing ETCS installation which you paid a lot of money for. Maybe you were hoodwinked by the supplier saying, oh, yeah, we will be fully standard compliant. And only years later, you suddenly find out, there is some, I don't know, 2%, 5%, whatever, that is bespoke, meaning not quite that conforming to the standards. That needs to go. So who's going to pay the money for that? Who's going to touch an existing running project again, which may be in the heart of an operating city railway? I'm thinking,
Yeah.
without finger pointing, I'm thinking of something like Cross River Rail in Brisbane, where you say, well, if I have to shut down this tunnel to retrofit something in the ETCS software with a certain risk that something may not quite work at the end of this, I don't do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to pay the money for
Yeah.
this. I don't want to risk shutting down my railway. I don't want to risk that something doesn't quite work after that software change. I just don't want to do any of this. So how do you see the creation of a system authority which has this leverage to say, but you've got to do it anyway, and you've got to pay for it
Yeah.
yourself because we're not going to pay for mistakes that you made in the past. Whether you made the mistakes knowingly or not, but still, this prevents interoperability, so it's your responsibility to fix it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question, Frank. I mean, and the answer is, as we mentioned before, you've got to have that governing body in place, and it can't be a toothless animal. It's got to have some teeth with it.
Yeah.
So it naturally has to go. It's got to be a federal government because naturally it should be. Um, it's got to have the ability to raise these issues and have those conversations, and they will end up very political in their nature by the very fact that they can be impacting. But I think you've got to have that body has got to be more than just a representative of pulling together the different states and having a cup of coffee together and talking generally about ETCS. It's got to be far stronger than that. And there are a lot of things that's got to be discussed as well right at the outset, as well as just addressing those very things in terms of the states and how they've applied ETCS, maybe or maybe not knowingly in a bespoke manner to a degree. There's things like the rolling stock, in particular, the private sector rolling stock of all of the freight companies, which it's important. We want to see freight onto our railways and away from the road networks. But at this moment in time, you talk to the freight companies. There's no benefit for them in terms of ETCS. The benefit sits with the rims more than it does with the RSOs. So that conversation has got to be had because uh, why would they spend an awful lot of their own money to fit in ETCS when they don't necessarily get all the benefits of it? So that's a conversation that's got to be had with government, and that's the conversation that body needs to be addressing really upfront. Because again, as you know, until such time as you've got all of the rolling stock that's going to be rolling over these fitted networks, you will not get the benefit because you're still going to have signals there.
Yeah.
So we've got to look at it from a national perspective, and that national perspective may be state by state by state to a certain degree, dependent upon where these rolling stock is running themselves. Inland rail helps, but it will still not take away, for instance, the huge amounts of freight trains that I see every day rolling through on City Trains network, unfitted, no SPAD, stroke overspeed protection, all of that good stuff, and all that's doing is further impacting the performance of an already stretched railway, as we talked about earlier on, through no fault of their own.
Yeah,
So yeah, we've got to have that body, and it's got to have some teeth, and it's got to. And I think from a national perspective, we need the states to come to the table as well, and to accept that there are some hard conversations downstream to be had. And as long as you can have those, that there is always a way to manage and minimize the impact of ultimately heading towards that goal that we need, which is interoperability.
yeah. And there's absolutely a commercial component to that. You said that where do the benefits sit? That the infrastructure managers may benefit more from that than the rolling stock operators. So where's the benefit for the rolling stock operators? And I could imagine there is something that could be done via access charges, that you either give a discount for trains, locomotives that are fitted with ETCS, or you do a penalty for locomotives which are not fitted at some point in time. But these are obviously very, very sensible um, conversations where some parties may feel treated unfairly and discriminated even, and so on. So there it will be difficult to say the least. Being conscious of your time, I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about a post of yours where you said that the rail industry has the equivalent of a global pandemic. Tell me what you meant by
Yeah,
that.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that one quite well. Yeah, again, it was written around my love of the industry, if you know what I mean. I mean, I've been around. It's a long time ago when I first started in this industry. Very green and didn't know an awful lot about it. And over time, I've learned a lot, and I've seen a lot in terms of um, the industry often being treated as if it's a tap. You can switch it on and you can switch it off. And I want to raise the awareness to the parties that can actually influence that, which is government, and for them to understand that you know, the railway industry isn't something that you can switch on and off, and so the resources that we have are they're very skilled resources, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about signaling engineers, comms engineers, civil engineers, rolling stock engineers. They're all very, very highly educated, highly competent individuals that you can't just suddenly decide, oh well, we're gonna really build all this stuff up, and then 10, 15 years later, we're going to stop for a while, and we'll look at it, we're revisiting it, and then think that 10 years after that, you are going to be able to switch the tap back on, and that the industry can step up to that, because it can't. Um, and that's not trying to say we're special. We are special. We know that, but you know what I mean. It's important to understand that this is a highly skilled industry, and I think related to that, and the other part of the post was, so I'm obviously concerned about the fact that if you look at our industry, I've looked at it from an IRSE because I sit on the council there. So we obviously monitor the numbers of people coming into the IRSE, and the demographics of it. If you look at the demographics of the IRSE as an example, something in the order of 36, 37% of the membership is 50 plus years old. You then start to look at the other end, something like 5 to 6% is 25 and younger. Now you take those two numbers, and by the way, that is reflected throughout the industry. That isn't just the institution, it just mirror images what's going on in the industry. If we're not careful, we're heading towards a cliff where ultimately people will leave the industry either naturally or because they want to retire, or sadly for other reasons. But it's an aging industry, and we need that. We need to make sure that we retain the benefits and the learnings that those people have got. But we've got to feed them to somebody, and it's got to be to a younger generation. And I think if you look at this moment in time, that figure of 5 to 6% of membership less than 25, for me, just demonstrates that as an industry, you look at the younger generation, they don't even understand what the railways are. They probably think, oh well, yeah, it's got train drivers. I've seen them because I've watched them go past on the platform. I've seen guards. They might know about signalmen and operators. They might not. Um, and they know they've got station staff, but they don't understand what's behind this, what goes on that keeps that going. And I think we've got a huge obligation as an industry to educate the younger generation, go to the schools, go to the universities, go to colleges, and explain to them what this industry actually does. There is so much scope, and it doesn't matter whether you want to be an engineer, whether you want to be an operator, whatever. There is so much that this industry offers that I think we keep uncovered. And unfortunately, if we don't do something soon, then that pandemic will happen. We'll end up losing from one end a lot more numbers than we're bringing in at the other. And don't look towards artificial intelligence and all of that to replace it. It won't. It absolutely won't. AI and machine learning is about assisting educated people to make educated discussions or decisions, if you know what I mean. It's not there to do the job for them. It's there to support them. So don't think that that's the answer to everybody's prayers. It's not. We need to bring on the youth of tomorrow, or the railway people of today need to be replaced by the future railway people for tomorrow.
I recently heard somebody said artificial intelligence is not the same as artificial wisdom. And so you can get the intelligence from AI, you can't get the wisdom from AI. You need to have the wisdom yourself, or you need to acquire the wisdom from somewhere else in order to judge whether the information that you get from AI is actually worth its money, right? Um,
Yeah.
so your point, if I understand you correctly, is we need to put more effort into getting young talent into the industry. I would want to look at the other end of the spectrum as well, and that's the aging population in the industry that threatens to retire anytime soon. How can they uh, how can they be retained in the industry for longer, and how can we get to maybe a slightly different task for those older folks, which would be some kind of mentoring role for younger people. So to me, that seems to be almost like a blueprint how you can educate the younger parts of the industry, and to get them towards that wisdom that's needed for the future of the industry. But I can't really see any kind of systematic approach towards that. So, for example, there are ways, and some organizations do that quite successfully, to retain older folks in the workforce. And the example I like using is train drivers. So while I was working in Victoria, I spoke to V-Line, and they have train drivers that are often in their 70s, and they provide those people, those older people, with meaningful jobs because they can offer jobs that fit the lifestyle ambitions of those older people. So it's not an 80 hours
Yep.
per week full-time work. It kind of fits into their lifestyle models at this part of their life. But I I struggle to see this in other areas, in engineering areas, for example, and this whole concept of mentorship seems to be also very, very punctual. Like somebody approaches me personally and said, well, can you be my mentor? And then I may say, okay, and then you've got a one-on-one relationship, but this is just a drop in the bucket looking at the entire industry. So what could be done in your view to have a bit more strategic approach to that, to keep people in the industry for longer, and to make proper use of their wisdom in order to educate the next generation of talent?
Um, Again, a good question, Frank. I've got some views on it. I mean, I think ARA have done an awful lot of work in the background on this here in Australia, and then it's something they're spending a lot of time to actually try and identify what the solutions might be. So, and at least they've recognised it is a challenge, and they're trying to do something. I think as an industry, again, I know I touched on it before. I think both governments and industry, and when I say industry, I mean the people like ARA, and to a degree NTC, or those bodies that are advising and steering, giving direction to industry, but also the suppliers as well. We need to come together to understand, well, what can we put in place that one, I think, recognize that we have an issue, and I do believe we do have an issue. And then how do we address it and work jointly together, to find a resolution to this? Because there won't be a shortfall of people who want to stay involved in the industry, who would love to be mentors, not full time, but would like to gradually work their way out and in towards retirement, but want to give back what they've gained from this industry. I mean, that's one of my biggest motivators is I just want to give back, because it's a fantastic industry, and I'm not alone. You're exactly the same, and there are many people who have of that mindset that don't want to just gracefully drift out of the industry. They want to help the industry grow, and I think it's important that uh, suppliers do their bit, as well as obviously government. It's not just one person. You can't point towards government and say, well, you've got to sort something out. We've all got to come together. Does that mean a forum of some kind? I don't know. And it's always good to talk about creating talking shops, but it's got to be more than that. It's got to be something that's focused and understands that, um, you know, we have a challenge, and we can't individually sort it out. We've got to, collectively, as a group, as an industry, as a family of railway people, we've got to work it out how we do that and how we move it forward, because it is a real, for me, it's a real problem that's looming up. The numbers speak for themselves, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
I,
not,
I, yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Steve.
No, and I think, there a silver bullet? No, but I think the starting point is recognizing we have an issue, and the other thing is some people like ARA, but build on that and become a community that recognizes that this isn't about the private sector winning or the government sector winning. It's about the industry as a whole. Find a solution where we all win, because otherwise we will all ultimately lose.
I think this is one
And,
of
and
the
by the way, Frank, I have seen some good private sector companies that do actually do their bit towards this. So it's not like they won't invest, but I think it's right that we all invest both time and money, maybe, to actually solve this
yeah, yeah.
jointly.
And as much as we talk about the future, and we have during the entire episode, I'm grateful for that, and for your input there, for your insights. But I think this is something where we need to look back at legacy and maybe adopt some of the good old ways of doing things. I mean, you were educated in the UK, and you often mention this in your post, how much certain people in the industry have helped you growing and developing your career. And most people in our age can tell of such stories of these, yeah, call it mentors in lack of a better word, people that help them getting into the industry, developing into the industry. And I'm not sure whether this is still as culturally entrenched as it used to be in the good old days of British Rail. It probably isn't, but maybe it should be again. And
Yeah, yeah.
and maybe if some organizations can get back to those ways, saying, okay, I've got a young engineer here. I need to pair this person with a more mature, experienced senior person and make this deliberate so that I develop some kind of systematic approach towards the transfer of wisdom from the older generation to the younger generation. I think this is what the industry could need more of. And the companies that do this more will be better off in the future.
I absolutely agree with you, Frank. And a good example of that, and you see it in other industries, is where um, you bring in young people, and I would say apprentices as well as graduates, because it's both, and actually work together so that, for instance, the private sector um, has an agreement with the public sector for them to do some work and learn on that side of the fence. So do 6 months, on the client side, as well as just on the private sector side, because it's something I always tell people whenever I talk to them and I talk about where do they see their future, I always say to them, you really do need to understand both sides. You need to understand both the private sector and also the public sector, because though we might ultimately think we're all looking for the same end game, our approach and how we achieve that is completely different. And you only learn by experiencing both. And if we can have, as an industry, some kind of arrangement whereby you can have that interchange of people from the public sector going into the private sector for a while and learning a few skill sets, and vice versa, what you will get is a very, very rounded individual who is solid, and more importantly, makes the industry solid going forward.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Steve, you've got to run. Thanks very much. I used more of your time than I was supposed to. Always appreciate our conversations, and for everybody else listening to this one and said, I want to hear more of you, I will put together a Steve Allday playlist of previous podcast episodes and put it at the end of this one. So if anybody wants to get more of your wisdom, then there will be a first avenue. Thank you very much, Steve, and I'm pretty sure we will do that again at some point in the future. Thank you.
I hope so, Frank. I always enjoy my time with you. It's always good conversations, and thank you. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye. Hi, it's Doc Frank again. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you like the content, then the best way you make sure that you don't miss out on any of the future episodes, just subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you also get access to all the previous episodes, which I'm pretty sure there will be many that are of interest to you. Another thing that you can do to help not just your own environment, but the entire industry, is to share this episode with friends and co-workers, because it helps more people in our industry to get educated, and an educated rail signaling industry is a better industry. With that said, thank you very much. Hope to see you again soon, and bye for now.